Hey everybody, Mr. Campbell here, and given that we're all quarantined during this coronavirus epidemic, just thought that I would do something a little fun and go online here and tell a story that I used to tell in my when I was a teacher at St. Augustine in Ann Arbor. I told this story to my classes and to my youth group, and it was a very favorite story of the kids. I'm referring to the can of pork story. So I thought this story deserved to be recorded digitally. This goes back to when I was a teenager. It must have been probably 1996 or 1997. And when I was a boy, I had a grandma, my mom's mother, and she was she was just off on her own. She didn't have a lot of money. She was on food stamps. And she used to get this government food. I don't know if they still do this, but she would get like this government block of cheese or a can of government, like a can of government tuna or something like that. It was like this food that was right from the government. And anyhow, they gave her way more than she needed, and she would often come over to our house and give the excess government food to my parents. And we never ate it. We never it was really gross looking stuff. So we would always just put it down in the pantry, like in case there was a zombie apocalypse, and then we'd eat it, but probably not before. At any rate, some of the cans she brought, the canned food, it would just be like bare cans with no label. It'd just be like the silver can, and it'd have like a black stamp of what it was on it. So there'd be like a can that just said fish, and it'd have a picture of a fish. Or it'd say pork, and it'd have a picture of a pig. So, and she'd bring this stuff over. My dad would put it down in the pantry, whatever. So one time, and it would sit there for years. Like, this stuff sat there for years. So one time, I think I must have been about 17 or 18 years old. I had my buddy Dennis over to my house, and we were super bored. It was the summer, and we had nothing to do, and I don't remember how we got here, but we went down into the pantry in the basement, and we were looking, and I saw these jars of this government food, and we found a jar of pork, and it was just like a can with no label, and it simply said pork, and it had a picture of a pig. And I was explaining to Dennis where this came from. I was like, this has been here for years. I don't know how long it's been since this was put down here. And he's like, dude, let's open it. And I was like, man, that sounds great, but not here. This could be really nasty. Let's take it somewhere outside the house. So we got in his car and we drove into town, into Howell, and we drove to the Kroger, which is the supermarket here. I don't know if you guys have them in your part of the country, but we drove to Kroger. It was like a big grocery store, and we drove behind Kroger. And I took a can opener, and we opened this can of pork and dumped it out on the pavement outside Dennis's car. And it was just like, and it came out on the pavement. And I can still remember the way it looked. It was discolored. It was like this sickly white color. It was like, like those cat food commercials where it shows them scooping the cat food out and how it's like chunky, but in like the gravy. It was like that, but it didn't look, cat food looked more appetizing than this. It was like this white, chunky, flaky stuff, and it was like a sickly white color, like the white when you've had a Band-Aid on your finger for like 2 weeks and peel it off, like a sickly white, and there was spots in it, and it had this hideous look and this smell, and we dumped it out and we looked at it, and just the sight of it, we started gagging. We were like, like when the bile comes up in your mouth when you know you're going to puke. And we're like, oh! And so we get in this car and we drive away. We like drive behind the Kroger. And we drive away and we kind of catch our breath like, oh man, that was the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. And then we say, let's go look at it again. So we drive around and look at it. We drive all the way back around the Kroger, and we drive back around. We see in the distance the little sloppy white pile of government pork sitting in the parking lot. We drive up to it and we look at it, and just the sight of it again what had just happened, just seeing it for the second time, immediately it was like, ugh! And I saw Dennis, he was like opening the door, and he had like, the drool coming out of his mouth like when you're about to throw up. And I'm just like, get out of here. So we drove away from it again. And but we were gluttons for punishment, so we decided to drive by and look at it one more time. It's like when you see an accident, you can't just not look at it. You had to keep looking at it, So we drove up, but this time we stayed distant. We stayed like, we stayed a little ways away, and we were looking at it, and we were just like, oh, it was so disgusting. But we were also laughing our heads off because it was so funny. Anyhow, we went back home, and we were just like, I can't believe how disgusting that government pork was. But it was so gross that we couldn't resist. I think like a day or 2 days later, we're like, let's drive back and see if somebody cleaned it up. And so we drove back there, and it was gone. But you could see like a little greasy spot on the pavement where it was. And I was like, oh, some poor employee had to come clean that up. I hope not. I hope maybe it was an animal or something made it. But anyhow, I told this story for years in my live classes, and people loved it for some reason. So that is the story of Mr. Campbell and the government pork.